The air hangs thick with the scent of jasmine crushed under iron-shod hooves. It clings to your throat like a prayer gone sour, mixing with the sharper tang of sweat-soaked leather and the faint, metallic promise of blood yet to spill. You hear at first the low thunder of 100,000 souls murmuring in the shadowed halls of the temple, their voices a fragile weave of chants and whispers, rising like smoke from sandalwood altars. Then the silence cracks. A horn wails from the horizon, sharp as a blade's edge, and the ground trembles. Dust devils swirl through the courtyards, carrying the distant clamor of drums that beat not like hearts, but like the pulse of an onrushing storm. Women in saffron veils press closer, their fingers tracing faded murals of ancient gods who promised protection, but now seem carved in forgotten stone. One among them, barely past her 18th summer, lifts her gaze to the arched gateway. Her name is Sita, and in this moment, as the first shadow of horsemen darkens the threshold, she wonders if the deities she serves have turned their faces away. The invaders pour in like a flood of locusts, fierce-eyed riders with bows strung taut, their banners snapping like whips in the wind. They do not announce themselves with words, only with the scream of arrows slicing air and the wet thud of bodies falling. Sita's hand finds another's in the crush, a fleeting anchor amid the chaos. The temple's inner sanctum, once a haven of flickering oil lamps and the soft chime of bells, erupts into pandemonium. Shrieks pierce the haze, mingling with the guttural shouts of men who see not souls, but spoils. You feel the heat now, the press of limbs against your own, as the sacred daughters of Delhi, the ones bound to the gods by vows of purity and song, are herded like chattel toward the open gates, their silks tear on rough stone, their pleas swallowed by the roar. And, in the distance, atop a mound of earth that was once a garden, a figure on a black stallion watches. His name is Timur, and this is no whim of fury. This is the turning of a vast, unyielding machine. But that reckoning comes later. For now, the horror unfolds, one shattered vow at a time. What you're about to hear involves systematic violence against women, mass enslavement, and acts of terror that echo through centuries. These events are drawn from chronicles of the era, but they remain deeply disturbing. If this pulls too close to the bone, step away, I'll understand completely. For those who stay, we delve not to revel in the shadows, but to map the gears of the empire that ground so many to dust. Understanding the machine spares no one, but it arms us against its echoes. From that choking courtyard, pull back, breathe, imagine not the fall, but the fragile world before it cracked. Delhi, in the autumn of 1398, was no mere city. It was the throbbing heart of an empire stitched from silk roads and spice winds, a sultanate sprawling across plains where the Yamuna River coiled like a serpent guarding forgotten treasures. The Delhi Sultanate, under the fading grip of the Tughluq line, stretched from the jagged peaks of the north to the sun-baked Deccan south, a mosaic of mosques and mandirs where Muslim rulers held sway over Hindu masses through a tense ballet of tribute and tolerance. Gold flowed from Bengal's rice fields, elephants lumbered from the south bearing ivory tusks, and merchants from as far as Venice hawked glass beads beside Kashmiri shawls. But beneath the bazaar's clamor, fissures ran deep. Sultans like Nasir-ud-Din Mahmud Shah, a shadow of his grandfather's iron rule, juggled fractious nobles and restless Hindu kings who chafed under the jizya tax, their temples whispering of old gods and older freedoms. This wasn't chaos born of a single storm. It was a realm ripe for harvest, weakened by years of civil strife and the slow bleed of overreach. Mahmud Shah's court, perched in the red sandstone fortress of Siri, buzzed with spies and sycophants, but his armies swollen with mercenaries lacked the fire of unity. Whispers from the east spoke of Mongol ghosts stirring in the steppes, horsemen who claimed descent from Genghis himself, blending Turkic cunning with Persian poetry. And there, across the jagged Hindu Kush, rose the threat that would devour it all. Timur's empire, a colossus forged in the crucible of Central Asia's endless wars. This wasn't conquest for glory's empty cup. This was erasure, a deliberate unmaking of worlds that dared stand too tall. Timur didn't ride to convert or claim thrones, he came to account, to tally debts in blood and gold, turning thriving cities into ledgers of loss. Why does this matter? Because in the shadow of Delhi's spires, we see the blueprint of empires that promise order but deliver oblivion. And in our time, when machines of ideology still grind the vulnerable to dust, this story whispers. Look closer at the gears before they turn on you. Timur was not forged in the fires of hell, though his enemies would paint him so. Born in the windswept dust of Kesh, near Samarkand, in the spring of what we now call 1336, he entered a world still scarred by the Mongol tempests that had toppled Khanates like autumn leaves. The Chagatai Ulus, that fractured remnant of Genghis Khan's golden horde, sprawled across the Oxus River's fertile bends, a land of Quanats feeding emerald fields where herders grazed flocks under skies vast as forgotten promises. Young Timur, son of a minor chieftain named Taragai, learned early the bite of survival. Barless tribesmen like his kin roamed these plains, their yurts pitched against blizzards that howled like vengeful spirits, their loyalties as shifting as the Aral Sea's shrinking shores. Picture him at 14, lamed for life in a skirmish over stolen sheep, a raid gone wrong, where a stray arrow glanced his leg, leaving him with a limp that twisted his gait but not his will. That wound became his forge. Pain taught him patience. The steppes' harsh arithmetic, where a clan's strength was measured in horseflesh and unbent spears, taught him cunning. By his 20s, Timur had risen through the ranks of bandit kings, his raids on Persian caravans, funding alliances that swelled his tents with warriors hungry for salt and silver. He wedded Saray Molk Khanum, niece to the Chagatai Khan, not for love's fleeting spark, but for the legitimacy it lent a bridge to the ghost of Genghis, whose blood he claimed through tangled lines. Yet, it was trauma that etched the machine's blueprint into his soul. In 1,360 seconds, Transoxiana, as rival warlords carved the land like a feast, Timur's father fell to assassins' blades, leaving the boy to bury kin amid the stink of betrayal. He clawed back power in 1370, crowning himself emir in Balkh's dusty halls, but not before watching villages burn under siege flames that mirrored the rage coiling in his chest. Each victory demanded more. The sack of Herat in 1381, where he spared artisans but stacked skulls into minarets to warn the horizon. These weren't outbursts. They were lessons learned in blood paranoia honed by plots that twice nearly claimed his life, once by poison in his cup, another by a lover's whispered treason. Timur built not just an army, but a system. Intelligence webs spun from eunuch spies, ledgers tracking tribute down to the last camel, and a code of terror that promised mercy to the bent knee, oblivion to the defiant. By the 1,390 seconds, his realm pulsed from the Caspian to the Indus fringes, a tapestry of subjugated khans paying homage in Samarkand's blue-tiled palaces, where astronomers charted stars and poets sang of the lord of the auspicious conjunction. But the East gnawed at him. Reports from Afghan outposts spoke of Delhi's sultanate as a bloated fruit, its Hindu subjects swelling temples with idols that mocked the one true faith, its markets choked with infidel gold. Timur, ever the accountant, saw not piety alone, but plunder. Elephants for his wars, weavers for his looms, a blow to rivals who eyed his flanks. In the summer of 1398, as monsoons lashed the Punjab, he mustered 90,000 archers from the Ili valleys, lancers hardened in Persian dust, camp followers trailing like a river of need. And then, the spark. A merchant's tale reached his pavilion. Mahmud Shah's governors, lax in jihad, sheltered runaway slaves and bartered with idol worshippers. It was pretext enough. Timur proclaimed the holy war from his war council, his voice a gravel rasp over maps stained with wine. "We go to purify the land," he decreed, but his eyes lingered on the sketches of Delhi's vaults. The machine whirred to life supply trains, groaning under kintar of grain, farriers shoeing hooves for the long march, mullahs chanting verses to steal the soul. By September's end, they crossed the Indus at Tulamba, the river's ford a baptism in crimson. The town fell in hours, its mud brick walls crumbling under catapult stones, inhabitants herded into the bazaar and dispatched with the efficiency of butchers at dawn. No survivors to whisper tales, only pyres smoldering on the banks, a warning etched in ash. As the horde snaked southeast, the system's teeth sharpened. Timur's general's fierce kin, like his grandson Pir Muhammad, fanned out, torching harvest fields to starve resistance, enslaving thousands to haul siege engines through monsoon mud. Whole clans vanished into the baggage train, their labor fueling the advance. Delhi's spies brought word. The Sultan quaked in his palace, his elephants armored, but his nobles bickering. Timur smiled then, a rare crack in the iron mask, and ordered the captives culled. 50,000, perhaps 100 men, women, children, bound from prior sacks were marched to a Panipat plain and fallen upon by sabers. It wasn't rage, it was logistics, lighter loads for the final push, a message that mercy was a luxury for the obedient. The air reeked of it for days, drawing vultures in black clouds, and Delhi, that distant jewel, waited unaware, its sacred daughters tending flames that would soon gutter out. Winter's chill had barely kissed the Yamuna's banks when the horizon darkened. It was mid-December, 1398, the air crisp with the scent of wood smoke from hearth fires that dotted Delhi's sprawl. The city unfolded like a dream half-remembered. 3 wards clustered around the Jami Masjid's minarets, where calls to prayer wove through the clamor of ox carts and haggling voices. To the east, Hindu enclaves hugged the river, their temples aglow with diyas flickering against walls etched with tales of Rama's exile. Siri fort loomed red and resolute, its battlements patrolled by Tughluq guards in quilted aikatons, while bazaars overflowed with pomegranates from Kashmir and silks dyed the blue of lapis skies, but tension hummed beneath like a sitar string plucked too tight. Rumors of steppe riders had trickled in for weeks, carried by camel trains from Lahore's gates. Families bolted doors at dusk, merchants tallied coin for flight, and in the temple of Yogmaya, on the city's southern fringe, women gathered in quiet vigil. Sita had known these halls since girlhood. Born to a potter's family in the shadow of the Qutb Minar, she was offered to the goddess at 8, her tiny hands learning the mudras of dance before she could fully grasp their grace. Now, at 19, she moved through the sanctum like a flame given form, her anklets chiming softly as she lit incense before the black stone lingam, its surface cool under her palms. The Devadasis, sacred daughters bound by vows of chastity and service, numbered in the thousands across Delhi's shrines. They were the city's veiled poets, their songs invoking Lakshmi's bounty for harvest feasts, their bodies temples in themselves, untouched by the world's coarse hands. Sita's days blurred in rhythm, dawn ablutions in the Yamuna's shallows where mist rose like spirits, afternoons weaving garlands of marigolds, their petals orange fire a ward against ill omens, evenings in chorus, voices rising in bhajans that drowned the distant toll of sultanate bells. She dreamed of the river at night, its waters murmuring secrets of monsoon floods and lovers lost to the current. Her laughter, rare as monsoon pearls, lit the cloister when a younger sister Devadasi fumbled a step in rehearsal. "The goddess dances through us," Sita would say, adjusting the girl's veil with fingers calused from clay lamps. Life here was seclusion's gentle cage, fed by temple alms, protected by priests who bartered their sanctity for royal favor. But whispers pierced even these walls, the Sultan's armies massing north, elephants trumpeting in Siri. Sita pushed them aside, focusing on the oil's gleam as she polished brass idols, their eyes seeming to follow her with ancient sorrow. On the eve of the 17th, as twilight bled crimson over the battlements, the first scouts crested the ridge. Timur's vanguard, 5,000 horse archers under his trusted emir, Sulayman Shah, wheeled like falcons, scenting blood. They struck the outer pickets at dawn, arrows whistling from composite bows that bent farther than a man's arm span. Delhi's defenders, 20,000 foot and horse, bolstered by 500 war elephants, draped in chainmail and spiked howdahs, surged from the gates in a thunder of dust. The Sultan himself, Mahmud Shah, watched from a pavilion, his silks heavy with jewels that did little to steady his trembling viziers. The clash unfolded on the plain of Keberi, where scrubgrass bent under the weight of fate. Timur, astride his gray stallion, directed from a rise, his limp hidden by the saddle's sway. He had studied the foe, elephants, those towering engines of terror, but vulnerable to the unseen. At his signal, wagons upended, spilling caltrops, barbed iron stars forged in Samarkand smithies across the charge path. The beasts bellowed as hooves punctured, tusks slashing air in agony, their drivers fleeing the unraveling howdahs. Panic rippled through the ranks. Indian lancers, clad in lacquered bamboo, faltered as Mongol arrows sleeted down, felling captains mid-shout. By noon, the Sultanate line buckled. Timur's center 20,000 sabered cavalry crashed through, blades carving arcs of finality. The flanks peeled away, pursued into the river's ford, where drowning men clutched at reeds. Mahmud Shah fled south, his banners trailing like broken promises, leaving Siri to the wolves. Timur entered unopposed that afternoon, his horde coiling through the gates like smoke from a funeral pyre. Cheers from opportunistic crowds turned to gasps as the reality sank in. These were no traitors, but reapers. In the temple's cloister, Sita paused mid-chant, the conch shell's wail cutting short. The ground shuddered with hooves, and shouts in a guttural tongue echoed off the domes. Priests bolted the inner doors, herding the women into the garbhagriha, the womb chamber where the goddess dwelt. "Stay silent," an elder murmured, his voice a threadbare veil over fear. Sita pressed against cool stone, heart hammering like a Damaru drum, as shadows lengthened through lattice screens. The air grew heavy with the invaders' musk leather and horse sweat mingling with the sanctum's lingering myrrh. Outside, the machine engaged. Timur's orders, relayed by heralds on swift ponies, were precise. Quarter given to the obedient, quarter taken from the rest. But as his foragers' hardened tumens of 1,000 scoured the wards, resistance flickered. A knot of Hindu guards, loyal to forgotten oaths, loosed arrows from rooftop perches, felling a captain mid-plunder. It was a spark in dry tinder. By dusk, flames licked the thatched fringes of Old Delhi, and the emir's response came swift, no mercy for the faithless. Sita heard it building, the crash of doors splintering, the wail of kin dragged into the dust. One by one, the devadeses were pulled forth, their veils rent like paper vows. She clutched a garland's wilted stem, whispering mantras to steal her breath, as rough hands battered the sanctum's lock. The door gave with a groan, and torchlight spilled in, painting the idols in hellish orange. Figures loomed, bearded warriors in lamellar coats, eyes gleaming with the conqueror's hunger. "These are the idol keepers," one growled in broken Hindustani, gesturing at the saffron-clad forms. Sita's gaze met his, a plea unspoken, but he saw only prize. They were bound with silken cords from the altars, wrists chafing as they were marched into the courtyard under starless skies. Hundreds, thousands, perhaps from Delhi's shrines, herded with the efficiency of sheep to market. Sita stumbled on a loose flagstone, tasting dust and despair, as the line snaked toward the riverbank camps. There, amid tents stinking of boiled mutton, the horde's underbelly stirred. Camp followers, mercenaries from a dozen tribes, their appetites whetted by victory's wine. Timur's decree rang out at first artisans and maidens for the march home, untouched until Samarkand's judgment. But the night deepened, and oversight frayed. In the flickering dark, away from the emir's pavilion, the violation began. Not in frenzy, but method. Women parceled like loot, their cries muffled by gags of their own torn hems. Sita, pressed into a corner of canvas, felt the world narrow to the press of colloosed hands, the rip of fabric echoing like a god's disdain. Time-blurred pain, a white-hot wave that broke and receded, leaving her hollow, staring at the tent flaps sway. Around her, sisters fared the same, their sanctity shattered not by blades, but by the system's indifference. Warriors incentivized by shares of spoil, captains turning blind eyes for a cut of the take. Dawn found them marked, bodies aching with the night's accounting, souls adrift in a sea of stolen light. Word spread through the camps like fever. The sacred daughters, once veiled in divine grace, now fodder for the steppes' wolves. Timur, informed at morning council, furrowed his brow not in remorse, but calculation. These were no mere chattel. They swelled the train, strained the wells, invited disease. And whispers from the city spoke of unrest brewing, Hindus slipping blades under sleeves. This wasn't about one temple's fall. This was the machine's first stutter, a warning that faith's fragile weave could unravel the boldest weave. In the centuries since, we've seen it mirrored in shadowed corners, from wartime brothels to ideological purges where the vulnerable pay for the powerful's unchecked spin. But Delhi's pyres had only begun to smolder. But that dawn brought no reprieve. As the sun clawed over the Yamuna, casting long shadows across the trampled gardens, Timur shifted his gaze from the women's shadowed ranks to the city's heart. From the perpetrator's perch, the world simplified. Ledgers balanced in crimson, horizons bent to one will. He summoned his emirs to the silk-draped pavilion in Siri fort, its arches still echoing with the sultan's flight. The "The faithless breed rebellion," he rasped, his lame leg propped on a captured cushion. "We came to purify, not pamper." Orders flowed like water from a quinat. Divide the captives, smiths, and weavers to the wagons, the rest to judgment. But beneath the decree lurked the system's hum, each warrior's share tallied by quartermasters, loyalty bought with first pick of the spoil. From this vantage, the escalation unfolded not as chaos, but choreography. Pir Muhammad, Timur's grandson and right hand, a hawk-faced youth of 25, schooled in the old Khan's ferocity, took the eastern wards. His Tumen, 3,000 lancers fresh from Panipat's blood, swept through bazaars like a scythe through wheat. Merchant stalls splintered under boot, bolts of brocade trampled into mud, while families fled into alleys only to find them barred by spearmen. "Take the skilled, spare the useless," Pir barked, but his men's reins loosened in the heat. Villages beyond the walls, clusters of thatch in the Doab's fertile crease, emptied overnight. Whole hamlets, their wells poisoned with offal, saw men struck down in fields, women and elders chained to carts, groaning under grain sacks. It spread like ink in water. Incentives whispered extra horses for the quick haul, Emir's favor for the fullest load. Shift now to the witness on the fringe, a man who saw the machine's shadow without tasting its blade. His name was Ibrahim, a silk trader from Multan, graying at 40 and wise to the winds of change. He'd bent knee to Timur's vanguard at the Indus crossing, offering bolts of raw mulberry in exchange for passage, his caravan trailing the horde like a wary dog. From his perch on a rise overlooking Delhi's southern sprawl, Ibrahim watched the wards ignite. Smoke curled from the Jamaat Khana Mosque, where once scholars debated Averroes under chandeliers. Now, its carpets ran slick with the fallen. He noted the rhythm. Dawn patrols herding stragglers to the plain, midday auctions parceling flesh and craft, dusk pyres for the discarded. "It's no army," he murmured to his son, hunkered beside a date palm, "but a harvest engine, reaping souls for Samarkand's silos." Ibrahim's eyes caught the irony amid the grind, a breather in the storm's howl. In one looted courtyard, a captured lutist, fingers trembling, strummed a Persian melody for a cluster of off-duty archers. They clapped, tossing coppers, as if the world hadn't tilted. Laughter barked from a tent where a warrior bartered a gold bangle for a flagon of date wine, the bauble still warm from a widow's wrist. These men, step-bred on mare's milk and mare's tails, marveled at Delhi's bounty. Mangoes bursting juice like hidden gems, parrots in cages mimicking their commands. But the respite cracked at vespers when reports flooded the council. Hindu holdouts in the Purana Kila, slipping night raids that felled sentries. Timur's response was swift, a different victim type, to underscore the reach. Not temple maids this time, but the quarter's elders, priests in ochre robes who had sheltered runaways. Herded to the river ford, they faced the choice, recant or perish. Most bent, but a handful stood, their chance a faint counterpoint to the lapping waves. Blades fell, bodies bobbed away, a lesson etched in current. The machinery whirred on, reports chaining up the line. Pir Muhammad's tallies from the east, 5,000 souls, 200 carts of spice. Suleiman's from the north, granaries torched, fields salted. Incentives flowed downward. A victor's share doubled for clean sweeps, flogged backs for the slack. Numbers blurred into human weight. Villages that once echoed with wedding flutes now silent, their hearths cold as forgotten oaths. Ibrahim tallied it in his ledger, not for profit, but posterity ink scratches, noting the system's sprawl, how it fed on fear as much as flesh. And in quiet moments, as stars pricked the canopy, he'd recall his own flight from Multan's fall, the way Mercy's coin bought breath. This wasn't conquest's wild roar. It was accounting, cold and inexorable, where women's broken vows tallied as mere line items in the empire's endless sum. Yet even machines overheat. As the third day bled into the fourth, a hush fell over the camps, broken only by the lowing of seized cattle and the distant wail of a conch from some unbreached shrine. Ibrahim, bartering passage for a noble's daughter, paused at the Yamuna's bend, where willows wept into the murk. The water ran sluggish, choked with debris, splintered idols bobbing like drowned supplicants, veils snagged on reeds like ghosts of garlands. Across the ford, Timur's pavilion loomed, its silk walls aglow with lantern light, emirs' voices murmuring like distant thunder. Inside, the emir paced, his limp a metronome to mounting doubt. Scouts brought word. The Doab's fringes stirred, Hindu rajas rallying levies from the hills, their elephants repainted for vengeance. Worse, the baggage train sagged, tens of thousands chained, mouths to feed from dwindling wells, whispers of plague in the ranks. "The women slow us," one emir ventured, eyes on the floor. Timur halted, gaze sharpening like a whetstone on steel. These sacred daughters, plucked from temples like forbidden fruit, had swelled from hundreds to near 100,000 across the city's shrines, vowed virgins now burdens, their sanctity a chain around the horde's neck. Logistics clashed with legacy. To march them home meant mutiny's seed. To leave them invited uprising's bloom. The climax crested at midday, under a sky bruised with gathering clouds. Timur summoned the overseers to the plain before Siri, the ground still soft from recent rains. The captives assembled in ragged lines, Sita among them, her once vibrant sari dulled to ash gray, eyes hollowed by nights that blurred into one endless dusk. The air thickened with anticipation, the horde's ranks forming a vast crescent, banners limp in the still heat. Horns blared, a dirge that silenced birdsong, and Timur rode forth on his ebony steed, his frame slight but unyielding, a falcon's hood lifted to reveal eyes like chipped obsidian. He spoke not to the prisoners, but to his men, a proclamation in Chagatai, translated by heralds into the camp's babble. "The faithless weigh our jihad," it ran, their presence a thorn in the march to glory. Pauses stretched, deliberate, as the words sank in. Then the order, cull the excess, spare the skilled. But in the moment's stretch, time dilated. Sita felt the sun's glare like a brand on her skin, the press of bodies, a tide pulling her under. Whispers rippled sisters' clutching hands, a final mantra passed like contraband. One elder, robes torn but voice steady, stepped forward, raising palms skyward. "The gods see all," she intoned, her defiance a pebble in the avalanche. The crack came swift. A spear-bearer lunged, silencing her mid-breath, and the line erupted not in riot, but resignation's flood. Warriors closed in, blades drawn with the monotony of harvest sickles. It was no frenzy of bloodlust. The machine turned methodical, groups parceled to squads, the fallen dragged to pyres that crackled like dry laughter. Sita twisted free in the crush, a momentary gap born of a trooper's stumble, and bolted toward the river's veil of reeds. Mud sucked at her feet, hard a war drum in her chest, but arrows whispered past, one grazing her shoulder in fire's kiss. She plunged into the current, the Yamuna's chill, a merciful shroud, swimming blind toward the far bank where willows promised sanctuary. Behind, the scale tipped the balance. Near 100,000 temple maids, market wives, cloistered daughters met the system's verdict, their passing a tide that swelled the plain's silence. Timur watched from his mount, face impassive, but a flicker crossed his features. Overreach's shadow, the realization that erasure's cost echoed louder than conquest's trumpet. Resistance hardened in the aftermath, Raja's levies harrying flanks, the Doab's ghosts refusing to fade. The machine, for all its grind, had bent under its own weight, a hairline fracture in the iron. Sita, gasping on the opposite shore, wrapped her wound in river-damp cloth, the water's gift, a fragile thread to tomorrow. Not all broke that day. Some, like her, slipped the gears, carrying the story's spark into the smoke. Timur lingered in Delhi's husk for 8 days more, the air acrid with pyre smoke and the buzz of flies over untended dead. By early January 1399, as winter's bite deepened, he turned the horde northwest, wagons groaning under looted vaults, gold idols melted for coin, elephants lumbering with siege timber lashed to flanks, artisans chained in grim procession. The emir rode at the van, his limp eased by triumph's glow, but the machine-sputtered dysentery felled hundreds in the ranks, stragglers picked off by vengeful locals. Mahmud Shah slunk back to a fractured throne, his sultanate splintered into petty kingdoms, Jaunpur's poets rising in the east, Malwa's horsemen carving fiefs in the south. Delhi, once the world's richest seat, lay fallow bazaars choked with weeds, canals clogged, famine's specter claiming more than swords had. Timur never returned. Pressed by Ottoman whispers in the west, he marched to Samarkand, the captives' labor raising minarets that mocked their loss. He perished in 1405, en route to China, his body interred in Guri Amir's turquoise dome, a conqueror at rest amid the bones he piled. His sons squabbled over the corpse of empire, the Timurid flame flickering until Babur, a great-great-grandson, kindled it anew in India's soil irony's cruel jest, the destroyer seeding a dynasty that would rule Delhi for centuries. The sacred daughters? Those who survived, like Sita, melted into villages, their songs silenced, but seeds of memory sown in oral weaves that outlasted stone. Power shifted like sand in the Doab. The Tughluqs faded to footnotes, their place claimed by Saids and Lodis, each layering new scars on the old. Long-term, the wound-festered trade routes veered south, populations thinned by migration, the Sultanate's glue dissolved into regional mosaics that Mughal hooves would later stampede. And the irony? Timur's plunder funded Samarkand's renaissance, its observatories charting stars with gold from Delhi's vaults, while the city he broke birthed resilience's quiet bloom temples rebuilt in secret, vows renewed in hidden groves. In the 20th century's dust, amid partition's fresh griefs, scholars sifted the chronicles like archaeologists at a forsaken tell. In Delhi's National Archives, yellowed folios of the Zafarnama Timur's own hand, or near enough surfaced from Mughal attics, their script a spiderweb of justification. A Russian team in the 1942, probing Samarkand's vaults, unearthed deportation ledgers, tallies of Hindu craftswomen shipped east, their skills woven into Timurid tapestries now fraying in Tashkent museums. Closer to home, excavations at Purana Kila in the 1972 yielded arrowheads stamped with Chagatai marks, mingled with shattered lingams, tangible echoes of that winter's rage. One digger, a young woman from the site's crew, paused over a saffron shard, its curve hinting at a fallen veil, and felt the past's pulse quicken. These finds weren't mere relics, they were indictments, piecing the machine's blueprint from bone and ink. Why does it matter now? Not as distant thunder, but mirror. In eras of ethnic purges or refugee tides, we see Timur's shadow, the ideology that cloaks plunder, the logistics that normalize loss. It teaches that power's true terror lies not in the blade, but the system that dulls its edge for the wielder. Resistance, too, endures. A single swimmer defying the current, a chronicle defying the pyre. Human nature bends, but doesn't break clean, offering us the choice to dismantle the gears before they spin anew. Return to that courtyard, where jasmine once clung like hope. The gates stand empty now, weeds reclaiming the stone, but the wind carries a faint chime, perhaps a bell from a rebuilt shrine, tolling for the unvanquished. Sita survived, or one like her, vanishing into the Gangetic plain, to birth daughters who danced in secret. The sacred daughters were meant to vanish, their vows ground to dust in the empire's mill, but they didn't. Their echoes linger in the chronicle's stubborn ink, in the shards unearthed from forgotten earth, in the stories we refuse to let gutter, and now they're here with you, because you chose to listen through the smoke. If this tale stirred something in you, the machine's hum, or the swimmer's stroke, drop a comment below. What's one echo of history's gears you see turning today? Your voice keeps these stories alive. In the end, the gods don't forget, neither should we.